going to offer an informal meeting within NATO-Russia Council to discuss further ways of potential cooperation. NATO Secretary General Jaap de Hoop-Scheffer has said that NATO have agreed that Russia is important in many ways, and there are many issues on the agenda where NATO and Russia could be working together, such as, for example, counter-terrorism or Afghanistan. But he also said that by no means there are some issues where NATO disagrees with Russia's approach, and among those are such issues as Russia's recognition of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. He mentioned conditional and graduated re-engagement of Russia.
The NATO-Russia Council will meet on an informal basis, I underline on an informal basis, to re-engage and to have discussions on the issues on which we agree, but I also would like to add the issues on which we disagree. I do not think you can qualify what I just said, this graduated re-engagement, as business as usual, but as I've said many times before, and as ministers agreed, no business as usual does certainly not mean no business at all.
NATO's Secretary General Jaap de Hoop-Scheffer has said that both Georgia and Ukraine have made progress, but both still have significant work to do on getting closer to potential NATO membership. He said that all the NATO allies have agreed on two basic points, and those points are pretty much reconfirming the commitments that NATO made last April at the Bucharest summit. The first point is that Georgia and Ukraine one day will be members of NATO if they are willing to become members of the alliance, and also if they meet NATO standards.
RT's Daria Pushkova reporting there. Well, Alexander Nikitin spoke to me earlier. He's an analyst from Moscow State University of International Relations, and he said the US is still keen to help Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, although this process may now take years.
The US very clearly wants Georgia and Ukraine in NATO, at least as political decision, before Bush administration goes. They're not quite sure what would be Obama's take on this, and this is the last formal meeting where the decision could be taken, but it should be taken into consideration that it needs years physically adopt country into NATO. We are now talking about kind of a political blessing for such a step.
Now, in Ukraine, opinion polls suggest a large majority of the population are against joining NATO. That's despite a nationwide campaign to promote the benefits of membership. RT's Alexei Ryzhevsky has that angle of the story tonight from Kiev.
To join or not to join? In the last several years, the answer has been negative on the NATO question for more than two-thirds of Ukrainians. And despite a massive advertising campaign to persuade the population of the merits of membership, the most recent opinion poll shows that the attitudes have barely changed. Even though the support rose to 30%, still 60% of Ukrainians are against the initiative.
Politicians use the foreign relations factor for the electorate, and the issue of ties with Russia is used here as well. That's why people rely on emotions. In the west of the country, they support the idea simply because in the east, they don't. However, in both parts of Ukraine, hardly one person in 100 would be able to explain what NATO is.
The issue has been a source of considerable tension with Moscow. Kyiv received affirmations from the alliance that Ukraine, along with Georgia, would receive membership action plans by the end of 2008. But recently their hopes suffered a blow after the United States, which had been actively supporting the candidacy, toned down its support.
There is a long road ahead for both Georgia and Ukraine to reach those standards, and the United States stands resolutely for those standards, meaning that there should be no shortcuts to membership in NATO.
Russian President Dmitry Medvedev welcomed the apparent change of heart, saying reason has prevailed. But in Kyiv, it caused dismay.
Statements by Condoleezza Rice made some in Ukraine believe that the NATO joining ambition came to a dead end. However, people who are responsible for fulfilling this mission say that it's too early to call it a day.
Vadim Pristaiko from the Foreign Ministry's NATO department believes the U.S. Secretary of State's words are just diplomatic platitudes for some of the other member states.
I believe that it was done deliberately to show that it's not the USA decision only. Everyone has a word in NATO, as you know it, and this is consensus-based organization, and that's not about the United States to press anybody else, including those who doesn't even have an army. So it's not a dead end at all. It can postpone for the next assessment, like in February, maybe next year, someday, but it's not a dead end.
All say this issue will be dealt with later, but giving strong opposition to the initiative from several NATO members and Russia, as well as the changing format of the organization itself, hardly anyone in Kiev can say when, if ever, that could happen. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, Kiev.